Welcome, everyone, to our On-Demand Academy. My name's Tim Rinsey, and I'm excited to help you understand how to create a culture of accountability. As we go through today, one of the key things that we want to do is make sure that you understand how to take advantage of building and creating and leveraging tools and processes to optimize what you would do in terms of a work environment. So today we're going to cover a couple of things. We'll talk about what are key factors in creating a culture. It's important not just to understand what are those factors, but how do the ingredients go into that accountability element. And this isn't just about having a checklist. It's really about taking advantage of pieces that will help you be successful, regardless of whether you're managing big programs, portfolios, or you're just tactically doing day-to-day work and work assignments. We'll also get into what I call best practice approaches in building culture. Then we'll look at some of the technologies around this that will help you be productive in what you're doing. And hopefully we'll be able to make sure that you understand how you can actually make this happen for you in your world. So first off, one of the areas that we start into is actually how to create that culture. And I think that's important as we start looking at what we're doing and how that works, is that we want to make sure that it's not just you who bears the brunt of creating a culture of accountability. In fact, as we look at this, there's quite a bit of options here. In fact, I'm going to talk about quite a few bullets just getting out the door here in terms of the overall items that we think about. So culture just doesn't happen overnight. Now think about that for a moment. You start, you manage, you can probably keep track of you and a few other people, but when we talk about building a culture, it's very important that you are able to reference something that is adoptable, something that's manageable, and something that people can infuse their DNA into. In fact, in 1999, I coined a term, building a project management culture. And if you think about that for a moment, it isn't something that just says, yep, magically you'll turn on a tool, you do a little training, and away you go. Really what you have to have is an adaptive or a complex adaptive system that you can come and say, hey, we want to evolve this over time. If you think about creating a sustainable habit or a sustainable process, you think about how many days it takes to create a habit. Well, that's 21 consecutive days. Now think about that. If that means you produce a status report once a month, how many months will it take for you to establish a pattern that's repeatable that says, yep, I'm familiar with this, I've changed, I've adapted to putting in basically a report? That would be 21 consecutive months. So as we think about how we're working and what we're doing, we have to take into account the human system, basically people, and how we're wired into doing this. Now, again, we think about project management, and project management is about doing things and getting them done, right? We talk about on schedule, on time, within budget, exactly as promised. But the idea of getting that accountability is making sure that we can actually execute, but have the ability to have the team or the people doing the work to establish some of that accountability. Knowing what to get done, when does that get done? And then what's almost as important as just making sure we're checking a list or getting things done is there's a trust factor that goes into the entire chain that says, I trust my manager to run and put out fires for me. They can trust me that I'm going to give them the best estimate. I'm going to work through that. And then people align to the vision, mission, and values of a program. And this is important because that clarity allows them to adapt on what needs to get done. In fact, planning infinitely is a very waterfall strategy. In today's day and age, we do quite a bit of actual working through and agile processes getting infused into our day-to-day lives, into how development teams work, how technical teams work. And so what we want to do is leverage these pieces to help produce results. But at the same time, we have to make sure that we are aligned and getting the work done. Now, another best practice, and I'll talk a little bit more about this as we get into it, is something called effective delegation. And this is something that, believe it or not, even I've struggled with what we call effective delegation, especially depending on what role you're filling. But the idea is that you're tracking, reporting on deliverables. And there are best practices in doing these handoffs to ensure that people are successful. The other part of this is that the team will build and manage the estimates and solution. Now think about that for just a moment. That means the teams who are doing the work are best suited to provide us with the most information about what will it take and where are we at. And so if there's a problem, we want them to be part of the solution. In fact, they should be working to resolution. So, in thinking through this whole idea of creating the desire or a need for accountability, one of the things that we hear at Advisicon all the time is that senior managers, VPs, the C suite, executives say, I don't know what it takes to get things done in my organization. I have zero visibility. And this is why I get very excited about tools, is that tools aren't just there to just get things done. It's designed to give you metrics to help you understand what is there. It surfaces problems. It gives you projected forecast. And now, instead of running around being very, very busy, we can actually think ahead, see the problem, and adapt and respond. So some of the accountability key ingredients that we want to make sure that we use to build that culture is the fact that there is a two-way street, meaning that from the top down to the bottom up, is that we want to make sure that we can trust that we are getting good estimates, that people are working to get the task done, and that they in the front lines can make adaptive decisions that may need to be surfaced and prioritized, but again, they are closest to the fire working to get the work done. And as they work through that process, we want to know about what the problems are. Inversely, what is interesting about this is that as people are working through this environment, is that in many cases, if they don't feel supported, then they just go around to respond to the loudest screaming person, or basically the loudest noise, or the squeaky wheel will always get the grease. But the idea is that they can trust their project manager, they can trust their team manager, they can trust their functional manager, or know that the executives are working to put out the fires and solve some of the problems, but we need them to stay as nested and deep and focused. And so this trust is part of creating that culture of accountability, is that there's an accountability streak that runs up and down the entire chain of command, ensuring that we're supporting and prioritizing the work that needs to be done. That doesn't always mean that your project is the most important project. In fact, in many cases, we may want to trust our leaders to make decisions that say, you know what, this is not going to do what we need for the organizational growth. What we need to do is reprioritize our resources, or perhaps the price of steel in China, or perhaps the market factors of gas. Now the prices are off the roof. Maybe we need to put things on the back burner and be able to come and focus on what needs to get done. And so this is a trust factor that might be frustrating, but again, we have to let go and focus on what's in front of us. The other is that there has to be visibility to progress. So even if it's a simple burn down chart that says, hey, I've got 30 things to do and I'm checking them off the list, I can show you the velocity of what I'm getting done. Or perhaps I've got some work breakdown structure where I've organized the information that I need to kind of address, line out, and assign to people. And whether I make it a list or a time phase schedule, the idea is that I might have a baseline that compares our plan to our actual. But the idea is showing that visibility allows you to start to use predictive analytics. Again, this is why schedules, project schedules, time phase schedules, and KPIs that say, hey, I've got a key performance indicator that tells me whether I'm ahead or behind, or maybe I am eating up my buffers and my slack. I may want to take a look at how I address that. But again, not finding out till the 11th hour is not okay. We want to have as much early warning if things are slipping, or if we're ahead of schedule, perhaps we can do more. And people get very excited when things begin to move with that momentum. In terms of that visibility to work in progress, I think it's important to understand it's not just the visibility to what it is, but looking at is the effort delivering the value. Now, I'm not going to teach something on earned value, and we can get into some complex formulas, but I love earned value for several different reasons. Not only is there simple earned value and complex earned value, but the idea of earned value, it says, if I put time in, am I getting a return on that investment? Now, think about that. If you're managing a stock portfolio and you put $1 in, you want to get a return on that investment. What is it going up, or is it going down? What's that interest rate? How am I actually making on that investment? And so the same thing applies to getting projects and work done, is that we take skill sets and assets and we apply them to get the work done. And so in having this visibility to progress, it says, maybe we thought this was going to be easier. We're not getting a 1-for-1 return on investment. Maybe we're getting a less than one return. Maybe it's an 80% return for every dollar that we're investing or every hour that we're putting in. And so thinking through some of these components is helpful, but the idea is visibility to progress allows you to be accountable and then to surface your concerns, which is, you know what? This is what's happening. This is the honest truth. And what we can do to solve it is here they are, 4, 5, 6 things, whatever they may be. But the overall idea is having that. And in order to create that trust factor with senior executives or to leadership and management is that we have to see and understand where things are at. Now, here's this last point, and this is important to make, is that not having the perception that being accountable as a micromanagement tool, but really it's an empowerment. It means that the teams that are doing the work really are in a position to tell the story. And what we want to be able to do is to say, you are empowered to tell that story. We want to know what it really takes to run the organization, or what does it really take to deliver this module that we're trying to finish. This is an important factor because without that visibility, then what senior managers do is they typically say, well, you know what, they always complain about not having too much work and not enough resources, but they get the job done, so we'll just keep dumping on them until they fail. And though you might be leaving a trail of bodies all the way up to delivery, this is where the accountability factor is saying, hey, let me show you what we have. And the metrics will help make you defensible and allow leaders to make better decisions. Now, continuing along that whole best practices approach in building a culture, you have to think about engineering. And so what I like to do is kind of roll up my sleeves and say, let's talk about culture with accountability. First off, one of the things that you have to have in place is what I call a prioritization schema. There has to be some way to help you prioritize, or there needs to be an escalation mechanism that says, hey, if something isn't getting done as we expected, we need to empower our people to escalate that, surface it, solve the problem, come with solutions, but there needs to be an escalation that says, here's what's happening. And if we do need to reprioritize that work, having that in place ahead of time will ensure that you're able to be much more adaptive. In fact, you may have heard of the term VUCA, talking about volatile, uncertain. We talk about complexity factor or ambiguous. And these volatile environments, COVID-19, we talk about the Y2K, we talk about .com and .bomb, both explosive growth or shrinkage. We talk about financial crises. There will always be something going on. And having the ability to say, I have visibility to what's working, I can help people prioritize, and then if we have a way to escalate that, will allow you to be adaptive to any market circumstances. And while it may not be ideal, at least we're in a place that we're not flying blind. And that culture of accountability is that, again, we want to surface and make that visible. Another part of that is we talk about comparing plan to actual and then adapting again. So now having something that says, hey, I can say, this is what I thought, here's what it actually is, and not waiting till the end of a project to see how did we do on our original estimate, but really taking these in stride, meaning that week by week, month by month, phase by phase, task by task, we're in a place where we can look, are we ahead or are we behind? But we have that visibility. Something I want to encourage you, if you are a leader, is that if you truly are in a position where you're managing teams, you have to do this. You need to be patient with the early stage estimates. Now, again, for subject matter experts, people get very frustrated. Why can't you do this? It just seems so easy. But it takes people time to learn how to estimate if they've never done it before. Hence, we talk about story points, which is what's the complexity factor that we're trying to manage. So in essentially setting this up, we want leaders to be patient because the early estimates won't be accurate. In fact, they may go high, they may go low, but we want to have visibility to that so that we can manage, we can improve, and we can bring that back in terms of the lessons learned to try it. Another key element is that in many cases, when somebody gives an estimate, this is very common. So a team member says, how long will it take for you to build this? And they say, well, it'll take me a couple days, but they're thinking, well, it'll probably take me about 6 hours, but, I'll just add a little bit buffer just in case. And so the team member buffers it. Then they give it to the team lead who adds a buffer to it. Then they give it to the project manager who adds a buffer to it. Then that surfaces up to the executive or the sales rep, and they add a buffer to it. And by the time it gets up to the executives or the people who are might be the customer, suddenly it's wildly bloated. So we encourage people that says, when you're building this accountability, call out your float, call out your slack, identify your buffer so we can see them, and then we'll manage those. It's better to see that your buffer is getting burned up and having people work in a lean estimate than it is to just say, hey, I buried it and nobody has any idea of how long it certainly takes. Again, this breaks some of that trust factor. Now, this is hard because a lot of executives say, get rid of all the fluff, get rid of all the buffers. If you hide the buffers, you'll never see it. You'll never have a better understanding of perhaps what it will take and what the risk or the complexity factor is. And the idea of what I call a no BS assessment, meaning I need to know that if I ask a question, I'm going to get an honest answer. No BS, right? Tell us exactly how bad it is or how good it is. But I want to basically say, take the emotion out of the equation. And so when we begin to have this dialogue and this repeats over time, people are confident that they can surface, it's visible, we manage, we watch it, and people are able to tune their adjustments, adjust it, and go, you know what? I wildly underestimated. Let me come back here and think about it. I'll come back to it. And the idea of these results, they get factored into future planning. So it isn't about the first few times that you start putting this in place. It really is pulling the metrics in, looking at them, and factoring out for the next project and the next time we use this team. So in that culture of accountability, it's important to be able to blend some of these pieces together and then begin to use some of the technology or tools to help you. Now, when I talk about tools, first thing people go to is either a power tool, a physical tool, or an electronic software tool. But one of the tools that I like to get into, especially when we talk about culture, is not necessarily technology. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. In fact, I'll showcase a few pieces of that. But the idea is having a prioritization, deliverables, and project information is to communicate. Daily huddles. We do regular sprint retrospectives. How did we do? We don't wait till the end of the project to do a brainstorming session. What we want to be able to do is to say, hey, this really was an awful approach. Maybe we can improve this. We can work on something different. The idea of pulling these pieces together is extremely helpful. And so that prioritization, deliverables, and working on the information requires communication. Secondarily is we do have to update what we're doing. That list of things that we're kind of burning through, we want to make it visible, we want to update it, and then here's the important part. Rebalance your portfolio of work. Whether it's your workload personally, or it is your professional workload, or it's a program or a whole initiative that a group of people are working on, that rebalancing is based on that prioritization schema. Again, strong communication and reporting process helps to surface issues early and allow senior management to basically make better decisions. Here's the one that I kind of struggled with early on in my career. So as a founder and as a technician, I love to do the work that I do. As a founder or a CEO of a company, sometimes I get into the fact that I think everyone understands what we're trying to do. And I would get sucked into perhaps doing what's called abdication versus delegation. Now, let me explain that. Abdication says, hey, I got something for you to do. I'm going to hand it to you, and I trust that you're going to get it done. And in that handoff, what we did is we didn't define the success criteria. When you do delegation or effective delegation, you hand something to somebody and say, all right, here's what I want you to do. This is what it looks like when it's done successfully. This is what I expect to have happen. And if it doesn't happen, here's how I want you to communicate with me. Here's the timing that I'm going to need this. And while this seems very simple, trust me, it's not. It's one of those things that says if you're going to take your entire plate and take the bottom half and hand to other people so that you can focus on the top half of your workload, in doing that handoff to your resources, you want to make sure you're doing strong and effective delegation. Set them up for success. Tell them what to do if they're not getting it right. Define what success looks like and certainly create a schedule. Again, building that trust means that you're handing off somebody something, they're clear on what they're doing. And again, you're not just saying, there you go, you got it, make it happen. What we don't want to do is have that. Otherwise, you're going to be putting out a lot more fires. And as I've heard through organizations for the last 20 years, people say this, well, I might as well just do it myself because it never gets done right. Aha! That is a symptom of not effectively delegating. Another thing that you'll hear very commonly is that common sense isn't common. In many cases, people are busy or they don't necessarily know the tools, but there's a functional tool I will tell you is extremely helpful. And I thought everyone did this, but they clearly don't. It's called time blocking. The idea of blocking out time to get something done so you have no other distractions, or finding a way that says, I can organize my vast list of deliverables and activities, and I can schedule them in a calendar or on my day planner, or I'm putting them into my schedule of things that I'm trying to manage. Maybe I put the top items on the top of the list and I have the lower priorities on the lower of the list. But the idea is blocking out time to do that work is super helpful. And the idea is this eliminates something what I call is defractionalization. And that's kind of a big word to roll off your tongue, but in defractionalizing yourself or your team, it helps them not be fractured where they stop, start, stop, start, stop, start. They're always going around spinning plates. And if you've ever worked with contractors that are out there, perhaps maybe you're trying to do a home remodel or get some landscaping done, is you hire some guy, great price, he talked a good, told a really good story, but now what he's doing is he's juggling 5 or 6 jobs, and so he's running around all the jobs all the time spinning those plates, and not a lot is getting done. So at some point, we really lose momentum when we have to stop and start and stop and start. So time blocking is an amazing tool to help you and your team really create measurable results. And this is important. The idea of that accountability is we've given our teams permission to say no, permission to block out that time. Again, if you're doing strategic work or you're doing program or projects, then I always recommend get into and use project, program, and portfolio management tools. Organize these vast lists. Put them on a Post-it note. Put them on a wall. Put them in Planner. There's a lot of tools you can play with to help organize this. But whether it's strategic or day-to-day tactical tools like, say, for example, Microsoft To Do or Outlook or using Teams and their list functionality, you've got some great tools to help you kind of organize so you aren't overwhelmed with all the things that need to be done and that you can focus on producing those results. Now, since we're talking about technology now, you knew this was coming, there's lots of tools here. We talk about things that are in motion and Microsoft's connecting these. You might be using Jira, you might be using non-Microsoft technologies, but there's a lot of tools that go out there where people track notes and action items and assignments. And we think about the work tools that are around project management. You'll notice that there's a planner, there's these Microsoft Project for the web, there's Project Portfolio or Project PPM, and I don't know how many P's they can put together, but there's a whole lot of them when it comes to project tools. It's important as you go through and begin organizing your work activities that you find the right tool or the right hammer for the job. And there are differences between some of these. Now, I'm going to show a couple of what I call task or work management tools. I think this is kind of helpful for people to see some of this. So let me just switch over to one of my favorite, and that is Microsoft To Do. Again, this is a simple tool. You can download it. Don't need Office 365. But the idea is you can organize your activities. You can kind of schedule what do you want to do on your day so that you can focus. You can pull things out. You can create your own internal recurring list that you want to work with. Or if you're using Outlook, you certainly can flag an email and say, hey, listen, I actually need to work on a few of these things. And you can check these off the list. A lot of people love having a quick tool that says I can organize tasks. In fact, some of these tasks will come from things like Planner, which you're going to see here in just a moment. But the idea is that when I come in here, I don't have to always have just something that I typed in. I can actually bring it up and say, let's just jump over to that particular task or that card. Where is that coming from? So looking at some of these tools are helpful for you to kind of organize. Again, Planner is a good tool, but if maybe you're just needing simple task management, there's nothing wrong with doing something like that at all. Secondarily, if you're working with projects, you'd certainly look for a time-phased engine that says, hey, if something takes longer, I want to see what happens if it stops or starts. What's my baseline? But in working and managing these, sometimes what we really need is a place to collaborate with some of our tools. So if I go back over to Microsoft Teams, which great tool, is that you can organize and say, hey, listen, I can add tabs that help me be more productive. Now, what's fun about this is that you can add Power BI dashboards here. You could load project schedules or SharePoint sites, but the idea is the artifacts that you're organizing, the information that you're communicating with is centralized here. In fact, even if you go in here, you can even add something called Microsoft Lists. And you'll notice right here is that I can actually pull out and add a list of information, kind of like managing a spreadsheet, but now I've got people working in a central repository. Something else I'm going to show you that's fairly new here is that if you want to add Planner, watch this. I can actually say, you know what, I want to bring these pieces together. And I don't just want to have in a central list only things that I'm working with a single project, is that maybe I want to go back and pull my Microsoft to-do list into a view where I can see this. Or I can jump down here and say, hey, what's actually happening in some of these other plans? So I can look at the activities that are assigned and I can edit them in one place. So again, you can modify, you can manage, and you can use this all inside of Teams. In fact, if you notice up here, it says Planner Press To Do all in one place in Teams. So it's fun to be able to say I can centralize and I can connect the information that I'm working with. I can organize these in a channel. And truly, if I really want to actually come out here and say, you know what, let's actually embed the project schedule, then by golly, you certainly can. And while my screen refreshes here in just a moment, you can see that in a Teams environment, I can actually list the schedule, outline the activities, and again, I have that one version of the truth, even though the data might be in different places. In fact, if you want to, you can even look at creating views or organize information differently. In fact, one of the things that I'll do a lot of times with our technical teams is I ask them to surface different bits of data that might be in Project for the Web, or maybe it's a mixture of things that are happening in Project Online. But the overall idea is that as I come in here, what I can do is say, hey, listen, while I refresh my information, I want to see what's actually happening in the overall environment. So you can create apps, you can drop in project dashboards. In fact, you can look for different ways to share that information. And so if I come back in here, again, it's part of adding your apps. And so whether you want to create and add an app as a website, where you want to embed a SharePoint page here, if you want to build your own custom apps or draw from the many, many different choices, again, Teams allows you to kind of centralize that information and make it visible and available for us to work with. And again, because it's secure, we know that we can trust who is actually coming in and what they see. So again, if this is my team dashboard and I'm looking at, hey, what the work is and what I'm tracking or what's visible, I can come in here and interact with the information. I can cross off which projects are done or not done or that I want to see. Or I can continue if you want to play around with a few of these and say, you know what, just give me a project dashboard. I'd like to see what our dev team is actually up to on this project. What's the effort? What is the tier? What's happening? So again, whether you use a embedded pre-existing tool or you built a Power App, you've got a lot of flexibility in helping to surface the metrics and the details that you use. Now, today I don't want to spend all my time in tools because I think it's important that the tools that come together in building a culture of accountability in many cases really stand outside of the technology. They really go back to what are we trying to accomplish? So as we think a little bit more about our presentation and how we're putting these pieces together, let's just jump back in and let's review a few of those pieces that are going to be helpful for us. Again, thinking through whether it's a Power BI dashboard. Let me bring up my Power BI dashboard here. Is it a planner hub where I can actually go in and organize things by card, or I can drag and drop tasks or click on these and assign them to people? Certainly can manage that. Is it the full-blown schedule that says I actually have a high visibility of what all the work is, and every one of these rows is a project schedule? Or maybe you're using the lightweight version of just saying, hey, listen, while I come in here, I just want a simple place where I can work in a browser. I want to keep track of some of my data. And while my screen refreshes here, I get a grid. I get a Kanban board and a timeline that allows me to organize it, and there's not a lot of learning to come in here and manage the overall details of what gets done. In fact, I can come out here and just say, how hard is it to change the duration of a task? Well, there it is. Hence, Project for the Web, one of the latest tools, is designed to continue to be simple. Or if I want to come down here and say, hey, listen, I'm going to connect some of our activities or my milestones or deliverables, I can move these, I can manage them directly and figure out, hey, how do I connect the dots? So inherently, you've got a nice little interface, things to track, but we want to surface and make them visible and available. And even if I want to roll up and say, hey, listen, I'm doing a high-level strategic plan for my executive board, I need to show them all the things that are going across from Azure DevOps to Project for the Web to Microsoft Project. You can use tools, but again, the trust factor is that we touch that data once. We simply progress the work and the activities that we're estimating from. So in our overall environment, really us getting back to making sure we have visibility, it's helpful to bring these pieces together. So as we think in terms of that accountability breeds responsibility, is that we're empowering and trusting our teams to give us good estimates. We're working with them to help prioritize and solve some of the problems. And you have to be patient with some of these. So in summary, 5 key accountable steps that I would say to help you create a culture that actually thrives on being visible, accountable, and solving things together is that you definitely should create a prioritization and a reprioritization process. Allow people to surface the problems and then work through how you want to manage that workload. Again, giving executives the visibility to what you're doing is super helpful so that they can understand what truly is the workload and what is the risk factor. Again, having that no BS communication and work handoffs is that we talk about really being honest and understanding that maybe it's not the right estimate at first, but we're going to work through that. And so we want to make sure we take the emotion out of the equation and we work through communicating clearly and effectively. Of course, we talk about metrics, which is great. Tools give you metrics, and I love having metrics because now we can say, hey, are we actually burning down the things that we need to do? Is the velocity of the work actually going to accomplish? Is the earned value of what we're investing returning on that earned value of what we planned, or are we ahead or behind? We now can look at forecasting, what we call predictive analytics. And again, in using these tools to track, progress, report, and reprioritize means that we're talking about the same things. But again, we want to allow for the organization to fail early and fail fast. And what we want to do is go, yep, we want to learn, we want to apply that learning. And as we continue, the estimates for a new team will get better and better over time. The idea of not being worried about, hey, I got to put my time in here is an accountability factor. In fact, nobody loves timesheeting. I don't think I've been in any organization that ever loves to timesheet. But understanding that this is your primary defense as a team member to defend what will it take to actually deliver the work, and that it's being pushed upstream to help you prioritize what you're going to do is so important for both the health of a project, the health of a team, and certainly the health of an organization. So as we think about this, there's some great things that you can do. And again, I encourage people that if you're wrestling and working through some of these, continue to check out our thinkific.com. Again, this is our on-demand academy. I'm very happy to share this with you today. And so I encourage you to begin working on creating team accountability, personal accountability, and building a culture of accountability within and wherever you go. Thank you. My name's Tim Runcie, and I hope this was helpful.